Hi fellow crafters, I'm Terry and I am nuts about stamping. This week I learned a new technique and it is a stunner. It looks super complicated, but it's really easy. Let's keep that between ourselves, shall we? To make your fault line card a real standout, you want to choose your designer series paper very carefully. You'll see why as I go through step by step on how to make this card, but you want to watch for paper that has directionality so you don't end up cutting it so that your direction is off kilter on the card front. I've chosen these two patterns of the Season of Green and Gold designer series paper. They were scrap bits that I had left lying around. You can use whatever you have on hand once you learn this technique. To make my fault line card base, I used old olive and I cut it in half so that it would be a half sheet of regular cardstock. But then what I did, I trimmed off 5 centimeters from the length and then I scored it at 10.5 so that you end up with a card base that looks like this. Now what you want to do is take your more subtle pattern of designer series paper and you want to just lay it on top of the short side of the card base, and then you want to tear it. So you're going to hold it in place and you're going to tear it. It will slide a little bit, so just be firm with it. And you want to, I guess you can go straight across, but I'm going to do mine a little bit of an angle like so that you end up with these 4 raggedy pieces. But don't worry, it'll turn into a beautiful card. Now, I could leave my torn edges just like they are, but I'm going to add just a little bit of visual interest by taking my old olive ink and a sponge, and I am going to sponge the edges just ever so slightly to give it a little bit of visual interest and dimension. So I'm going to do the bottom piece and the top piece, and you'll see why I'm calling them bottom and top in a minute. Now, the next step here is to adhere this torn piece to the back side of the old olive section, which will become the bottom of my card front. Again, just be patient and you'll see what I'm talking about. So you get to determine how much or how little of the designer series paper you want showing through. And then you're going to take your multi-purpose liquid glue and you're going to glue them together. However, when you're putting the glue on the old olive piece, give yourself a little bit of room and you'll see why again in just a minute. So I'm going to put my multi-purpose liquid glue like so. And then I'm going to adhere these 2 pieces together. Like so. Now I'm going to do the same with the top piece and the designer series paper. I'm going to adhere them together, again, leaving a little bit of room on the old olive section, and that will add some visual interest to this technique. And now it's decision-making time. You're going to take your second piece of designer series paper and you're going to lay it inside of the card like so, and then you're going to adhere it to the top piece and the bottom piece of this fault line card. So what do I mean by decision-making time? You can determine at this point how much of this designer series paper you want to show through. So if you don't think you have enough, you want more, you can simply trim a little bit off of this bottom piece before you adhere it to the designer series paper. So if I want more of mine showing through, which I think I do, I'm going to trim maybe a half a centimeter off the bottom of the front of this piece. Okay, I have trimmed off a little bit from the bottom of this front lower section of my fault line card. And now what I want to do is I want to adhere this designer series paper to the top flap and the bottom flap, not to the bottom of the card or the inside of the card. So I'll go ahead and do that using my multi-purpose liquid glue, and I'll be right back. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to add a phrase to the front of my card. So I'm going to use the Simply Said stamp set, and just a note is the phrase, and I'm going to ink that up and stamp it down on the front of my card using Old Olive ink. All right, the card is coming together beautifully. Now, remember I said for you to leave a little bit of the edge not glued down, and here's what you can do now that makes it a really fun fault line. You can take your fingers, your fingernails, and you can fold back the designer series paper, the lighter one, and the Old Olive on both the top and the bottom to make it look quite rugged and I guess antiqued. Isn't that cool? Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. Look at that. Isn't that really super cool? Now, what we want to do is when you open up the card, you can see all of this designer series paper inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut another piece of Old Olive that matches the size of my card front, and I'm going to adhere it down flat on top of the inside top of my card. Now that will add a little bit of weight, so if you're planning on mailing this card, not sure it's the best technique for you to be doing so unless you want to pay a lot of extra postage. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then we're going to talk about how we can add some interesting elements to this fault line card. Back in a moment. Now there are a lot of elements that you could think of to add to the front of this card. I'm going to use one of the dies from the Painted Lavender die pack, and I'm going to use Old Olive. On the back of it, I've used a leftover piece of the adhesive sheet so that I can use this image, die cut it out, and create a sticker to add to the front of my card. So I'll go ahead and die cut this, and then I'll attach it to the front of the card, and then we'll talk embellishments. Back in a moment. All right, it's coming along nicely. As I look at the Old Olive on Old Olive, I might have chosen a little bit of a lighter color, maybe like soft seafoam, just to make it a little bit more of a standout, but I'm happy with how this looks. You might want to try something a little bit different tone so that you have more of a contrast. I think it's personal taste. Now, as far as embellishment goes, because there's the gold in here, I wish I had some gold embellishments, but I don't. So I'm going to use these gold textured adhesive dots just to add a little bit of bling and pull the gold and the green together. So I'm curious about one thing. Will you give this technique a try? It's super easy to make and it really packs a wow factor. If you would like the non-metric measurements for this card, just shoot me an email at terri@nutsaboutsstamping.com. I'll put a link in the description box under this video, and I'm happy to send you the non-metric measurements. I'm Terri. I am Nuts About Stamping. I'll see you at the next video. Bye for now.